Welcome to Intergalactic Tarboush, eclectic conversations from the Mena with Iyad al-Baghdadi and me, Ahmed Gatnash. We talk about politics, activism, tech, spirituality, mental health, and more. So what are you up to today?
So I also spoke to Usman, and most of the conversation, a lot of the conversation, of course, some of it was work, but a lot of it actually was about. Like their team is mostly focused on the Muslim minority in Norway, but also with that comes kind of a focus on Muslim minorities in Europe generally, which is an important topic.
Yeah.
Um, and you and him kind of share a background of being of immigrant background, but you grew up in Europe. You're basically Europeans. Um, and a lot of the conversation went into how he's like, did you notice that no Muslim leader in Norway has reached out to you as a Muslim who's involved in all of these issues and these struggles and these big news, um, and nobody has actually thought of this as as a Muslim issue or an Islamic issue. It's almost as if Muslim issues are what to eat, and
And the ones which are overtly about Islam.
yeah, but again, you define overtly about Islam, or maybe
Yeah.
define Islam. The whole point here is that there is this discrepancy between the narrative, because you are talking to the bigger society, to European society, and like, let's say, Norwegian society, right? And you're telling them being Norwegian is not about Brunost and lutefisk. It's not about uh, those material elements of culture that were considered traditional. It's not about what you eat and what you look like. It's basically about a set of values which bring meaning, have a lot of meaning, but also have had a lot of meaning in the development of Norway. um, so this is the message that the Muslim minority or Muslim minority. I'm not saying, of course, it's not exactly a homogeneous minority, right? So lots of different opinions within it, but there are prominent people within that that's actually saying that you should not exclude us by defining Norwegianness as a matter of culture, but rather it should be more about values, which is a good message. But that kind of like you're taking the wind out of that when you turn around and you say, actually, I look at Islam as a culture,
Double-edged
and
sword.
it's about these practices, and it's about what you eat, and it's about not dating or following these rules, and halal and haram in the sense of food, yani. It's, I don't know. I mean, why is it that these things are considered Islamic issues, but then the struggle for equality and the struggle for freedom and the struggle for justice is kind of politics rather than Islamic topics?
Yeah, and this also connects to the issue that I was messaging you about last night, which I spent like 2 or 3 hours thinking about, because the frustration just hit me all over again. So I basically got a fundraising email from a Muslim charity, and I get this sense that they define their mission as in terms of raising money from Muslims to help Muslims. And if they widen their audience pool to be everyone, like a lot of them have actually, in fairness, most of them are very good and they don't solely help Muslims, but they still treat their audience as being exclusively Muslim. Like they can't appeal to wider society and give something of value to everyone, maybe because they see wider society is doing better and they can only really compete in a Muslim-only market. But it really jarred with me the idea that I might not care about needy people unless you mobilize a hadith or an ayah from the Quran. Like, how morally stunted do you think your audience are?
See, it's making it transactional. It's like your relationship, not only with your God, but also with your community, is transactional, based upon give and take. I'll give you some money, you give me some points.
Yeah, there's that aspect of making everything about the rewards, but then another aspect is they don't really see it as, even the charity work, they don't see it as Islamic unless they're running around quoting scripture.
Mm.
Like if you just do the thing without quoting scripture, it's not Islamic anymore. Which I feel like is probably something to do with a very weak sense of identity and having to reassert that identity constantly.
Or it could be a habit that kind of became entrenched in us in some way.
Maybe.
That this is traditionally how we would do fundraising in a Muslim majority country, for example. But even then, do you really need to tell people that? I mean, isn't it enough to simply tell them that there are people suffering and you should
Yeah.
be, you should do the right thing
Yeah.
out of love and out of
Without mentioning
out
what
of
the Prophet, without having to mention what the Prophet said about orphans, for example.
yeah. And it's not that those ahadith don't exist, and it's not that this is not it is Islamic, absolutely. But I don't know. It's a matter of, I don't know. Maybe you can articulate better what it is that jarred so much that you spent 3 hours thinking about it.
So I pitched it to a friend who I thought would whose opinion I respect, but who I thought would come with like a different perspective. And she said basically something along the lines of, "There's nothing wrong with it. We're just, this is very central to our lives, and it's natural that we would always be talking about this." Um, but what I thought was actually the opposite. That this is like, so religion is. We all agree that religion is not necessary for morality. It's of course a very good thing, and it helps a lot. But it's possible to be moral without religion, because to say otherwise would be to basically assume that a big chunk of humanity are essentially monsters, and to go down like an original sin perspective, which isn't Islamic. But I see faith as kind of like these exhortations are like training wheels on a bike, and they help you develop a moral sense. And when that moral sense is developed, you should be able to make moral decisions um, autonomously. And we are like the kid who never got rid of the training wheels on the bike.
Mm.
And we treat it like you must always have Islamic scholars evaluating and rubber stamping your decisions, because to not have that would be to behave un-Islamically, or to not have Islamic guidance, because you can never fully internalize that Islamic guidance.
Yeah, because the fact that you need that reminder all the time means that you're forgetting it.
Hmm.
Um, it's actually like while you were speaking, I was actually wondering. This is like before I was imprisoned and expelled from the UAE, and I remember like the last i'tikaf that I did in Ramadan. This was 2013, and this thought occurred to me because I'm doing i'tikaf for the last 10 days of Ramadan, and I can see how the numbers of people, because you're actually sleeping at the mosque anyway, so you're praying all of the five prayers and the Taraweeh in the mosque, right? And I'm noticing how, and I think I started my atikaf that year 1 day early, maybe I can't remember. It's a long time ago. But you can see how the number of people who come from for the five salawat and for the Taraweeh increases, and then on the 27th, which is supposed to be Laylatul Qadr, uh, you have chaos. You have so many people, and they don't exactly act in a saintly way. It's almost like it's Black Monday. It's almost like
Black
like
Friday,
yeah,
yeah, on Boxing
sorry,
Day.
Black Friday, and they're just there to gather as much as possible and to get like the right spot in the mosque, even if they have to step on someone who's there. And there's a lot of rudeness. There's a lot of and the thing is, because you're already in a very spiritual state, you've been living in the mosque for several days, so it jars even more. And I started thinking about this, like, isn't it? I mean, the whole point about Muslims saying that secularism is bad is because it separates religion from life. This is the spiritual critique. If not, I mean, not talking about the political critique, but the spiritual critique. But isn't it also a form of dividing religion, separating religion from life? When you're like, I can be a terrible person all year, and then I can just go to the mosque on the 27th night of Ramadan, and kind of expunge my sins for the rest of the year. Isn't that also limiting religion? Like basically you're separating religion for the rest of the year. But also, if you take it further, when you make religion all about rules and about reminders, like these kind of like, do this so that you can get that, or do this so you can get 10 points or whatever, isn't it also a way to separate? It's like when you make religion all about these rules, isn't it separating religion from the rest of your life? Or are you going to make your life all about rules? Nobody can do that, because that's like you're being not. I think even robots can't do that. It's that's the jarring bit, because they say this is like we're against secularism, but isn't that also a form of secularism, a form of like dividing religion from life?
Yeah, and then let's not even get into the incoherence that we've spoken about before with arbitrary rules and lines of this is worth this many points, that is worth that many points. This one gets you a free pass for 12 months. This
Hmm.
one's this one's the Mario Kart bonus.
I mean, in a sense, I don't like. I haven't really taken another look at that from a spiritual point of view, like from a mystical point of view. But that's certainly the way that it's being interpreted by a lot of people.
I feel like you could probably make a fun parody video game about like collecting Azure multipliers and stuff.
Someone should do that on TikTok. Um, Before I forget, I have a call in the evening with. Do you know Raed Jarrar?
No.
So in 2003, after the Iraq War, after the American invasion of Iraq, there was this kind of blog that was being read. Um, so there's this guy who was blogging during the invasion, and he was called the Baghdad blogger. And he
Like
would later reveal,
like the '03 version of Mosulai.
kind of, but maybe. I mean, this was like before social media, so.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, he became. I mean, the blog became prominent because the only voice, basically independent voice from the ground, and it was Raed Jarrar, and he's, I think, Iraqi. He's half Iraqi, half Palestinian, and he's like American. Um, and Now he's working with Dawn,
Mhm.
and he wanted to talk. I mean, I don't think he knows that I know him from back then, but he's reached out. He wants to talk about the article that came out,
Mm.
and because they want to do this thing about accountability, so they want to actually look into the histories of all those 10 people who the security guards, and look into what other shady activity they might be into. But yeah, it was kind of a blast from the past.
Mm. That's cool. It's a small world and it keeps getting smaller. Imagine how many weird people we're going to end up meeting unexpectedly, like in the next 10 years, who we would have never
Yeah,
thought.
but yeah, and we are the weird people in a sense. Yeah, I mean, yesterday when I was praying at night, I just was overcome with this deep, deep sense of gratitude and honor, that what an honor it is that we get to work on this. I mean, we there isn't enough that we can do to show our gratitude.
Yeah. And that reminds me of my question of how do we actually glorify God if we're not separating it from religion, from life? And what does that mean in our
Yeah,
context?
I kind of resolved it in one of my mosques.
Yeah.
It's really glorifying God. If you realize that every human being has a breath of the divine, um, and honoring the human being, not compromising on any human being's dignity. By doing that, you are glorifying the divine. At least this is the meaning of it for me. So I was going to tell you about Surah Al-Ikhlas and how my spiritual experience of it has changed.
Mm.
Since I started, I realized that there are certain surahs, the short surahs. Uh, when I started contemplating the Quran, I started from the beginning. This was like several years ago, maybe a decade ago. Um, and now I'm actually thinking maybe it's useful for me to start from the other end. Mainly because these small surahs are going to be surahs that you recite more frequently.
Mm.
So it's more useful for you, more productive for you, and also each of these surahs is a complete unit on its own. But then I realized that some of the short surahs have they're not as meaning dense as others. So you go to Surah Al-Ikhlas and it's very meaning dense to the point that every single not only just every word, but also sometimes even the arrangement of the words has a lot of meaning, and you have to like dig down into it.
Mm.
And then you have, for example, like a surah like Surah Al-Ma'un, for example, which is very important and has a very important message, but is not as meaning dense when it comes to individual
Yeah,
words.
this is in the classical tafsir as well. Like I think in Al-Razi's tafsir, the entire first book is an introduction and then Surah Al-Fatiha.
Yeah, and that makes sense because Surah Al-Fatiha is the one that you recite in your prayers, so it's very significant. So I started with Surah Al-Fatiha and then I went to the end.
Mm.
But then I started to look at Surah Al-Ikhlas, and I started to look at it in a very different way because so when you look at Qul Huwa Allahu Ahad, and Ahad is a different word from Wahid because Ahad emphasizes uniqueness, not just number.
Mm.
So it doesn't say God is one, rather it says God is unique and is one unit. The way that I look at it now is to say God, it's the same God, it's the spiritual experience, that entity, that transcendental entity that you connect with, whether you're Muslim or Christian or a shaman, when you have legitimate religious experiences, it is the same transcendental reality that you're connecting with. And that's what it means to me now when I say Qul huwa Allahu ahad. And the next verse uh, confirms that because Allahu Samad. Samad means that one thing that everybody seeks. It doesn't change. It doesn't change its position or its disposition, but everybody points towards it. Uh, so you say Qul huwa Allahu ahad, the same reality, Allahu Samad. Everybody is seeking the same reality. And then Lam Yalid wa Lam Yulad becomes not really a dig at Christians, but rather the fact that this is the ultimate reality. It did not come from anywhere. It's not going to beget anything. It's not going to become anything else. It didn't come from anything else, and it's not going to become anything else.
It's
This is it.
not derivative.
It's not derivative, and it's not derived. Sorry, and it's not. Let me put it this way: it did not come from anywhere, and it's not going to become anything else. This is it. This is the final. This is the finality of it. So there's no reason whatsoever for you to seek anything else. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. It became, it again, I mean, it became really almost meaning none, even though like this verse is trying to position the divine and make you kind of understand more about it, which is of course what the Quran is about. The last verse to me means don't you ever think that anybody will be able to understand what the divine is. Nobody's competent enough, nobody is kafu enough to completely encompass in their mind what God is. So even though like basically have some humility in understanding that you're never going to understand, the mind that thinks that it can understand God is egotistical.
Mm.
So yeah, now it becomes different, the way that I engage with it, and it's like it's of course it's a beautiful surah, but also a surah that you can never get enough of.
It's heavy. You can't really read that in less than like a minute if you think.
Yeah, it has to hit your heart. So basically, you have to contemplate it so many times until it becomes part of you. And so when you say it during prayers, it hits you the right where it's supposed to. Even like Surah Al-Fatiha. Now, when I think about Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Ar-Rahman for me means God's cosmic mercy. Um, Basically, the fact that the divine created a universe that can be interpreted, can be understood, and a universe that evolves life, a universe which allowed creatures like us to exist. That's Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahim is God's particular mercy, the mercy of guidance.
Mm.
So the image that comes to my head when I say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Ar-Rahman, you look at the story of 14 billion years of the existence of the cosmos, of the universe, and you think how amazing it is that this ended up it ended up here with human life, and human life which calls out to the divine. And then you go to Rahim and says that not only did God create that, but he also gave us guidance and he gave us a way to connect with him. And that is, that's, not only, not only a fact of creation, but also a spiritual fact. And it's only two words, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. And then when you look at the next one, Maliki Yawmiddin, it's also telling you, remember where this ends.
Mm.
So yeah, it's I have like 10 minutes every second day where I do nothing but contemplate in the morning. This is like after my meditation.
And this is, I remember Hassan Farhan al-Maliki also had an interpretation here following on, which was really formative for me, and it was the first time I'd seen it in that light. And he basically refutes the traditional, very tribalist interpretation of al-Maghdubi alayhim are Jews and al-Dallin are Nasara.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah,
actually,
because it's easy to look at the next page of the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, and how Surah Al-Baqarah kind of breaks down um, three categories of people as well, and you can see like it's basically a mirror image. You can see Surah Al-Fatiha, Surah Al-Baqarah, but I don't know why we made the faith so quarrelsome with other groups. It's almost like we're pushing against in order
we defined ourselves in
to
opposition.
define ourselves, exactly. Which I don't think, I think a lot of the Quran, the moment you actually start reading it as a call towards unity of faith rather than division, and it starts to make a lot of sense spiritually.
Basically, if you're not watching out for it, tribalism infects everything, and faith is no exception to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I even start to like to look at, for example, when Ibrahim alayhi salam, um, when he when God says to him, "Inni ja'aluka lin-nasi imama," I'm going to make you a leader for humanity. So I'm saying Ibrahim alayhi salam, his next response or his next thought is, "What about my descendants?"
Hmm.
And for me, it's very interesting to compare prophets, their spiritual reality and their social reality, like their spiritual being, who they are as spiritual beings, and who they are as social beings who are part of their own social context. And you can see that Ibrahim uh, is immediately thinks, oh, being a leader of humanity in this day and age means being a tribal leader. And immediately he's like, what about my descendants? And then what does the divine response? What's the divine response? It's not yes. It says la yanalu ahdi dhalimin. It's basically telling him, don't think like that. This is not the way that this works. This is not. You're not becoming a tribal chief. You're not becoming the leader of a material nation. This is a spiritual nation, or this is you. Basically, you're a leader for, and of course, this is a theme that's repeated in the Quran several times about Ibrahim himself. Um, I find kind of the same thing in Surah Al-Kawthar. Also kind of like the prophet's spiritual being like God or the divine, basically uh, helping the prophet resolve his spiritual versus his social identity, because the spiritual identity of the Prophet is that he's a prophet. His social identity is that he's a man from Quraysh who is hurt when someone says you are childless, abtar. Uh, for us right now, it's not an insult. If someone comes to you and is like, hey, you have no kids, you have no male kids, it's not exactly an insult, right? But for his time and age, he is a human being, right? So he has that socially constructed reality. And then God sends him this verse to say, "Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar." Basically, he's telling him that these things don't matter. Look at what else we gave you. And it's really, for me, it's really a sweet moment, because it's kind of like, it's also educational for us, because we also have a spiritual reality and a social reality, and you have to kind of understand who you are spiritually versus who you are as a social construct, as a being, as an ego.
And then you look at what we did with that in fiqh, and how we firstly made it so that the Khalifa can only be from Quraysh and a descendant of the Prophet. Then we decided that the Prophet's descendants are Sayyids, and they have like a special category, and they can't be given charity because that's demeaning to the blood of the Prophet, and all of these things.
Yeah, fiqh is a product of its time, and a product of the values of its time, and that's why I think we need fiqh needs to be a continuing discussion. I mean, it's never something that's done. Otherwise, otherwise you're kind of keeping Islam stuck in a previous age. Anyway, I have to get to my calls, and I hope that it's not one of those days when most of my day just goes to calls. But let's see.
Good luck.
All right.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks for listening. To support us, please leave a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also find the link to our Patreon in the episode description. See you next time.